super, super important question. Was really just an icebreaker and to get you turning on the Slido so that it's on your phone for the rest of the talk. I have to say, y'all are a very creative bunch of people because the answers that I have heard have been way above what I was expecting. So I heard about the teeth of ducks, and I heard about geologic history and how horses used to be the size of ducks, and then a whole range of different things. But really, all I was trying to do was get you on Slido. I'm going to try and use Slido for questions as well. So throughout the talk, you can actually, if I don't know about you, I got that ADD brain thing where I'm like, I have a question and I want to ask it right now. You can go ahead and just type it in. We'll all see your question, and then other people can like your question. And then at the end, we should have a list of questions that are already prioritized. You can get there if you go to Slido and then click the Q&A, you can ask the question. The other thing I wanted to note is many in the room actually know me, but as a college professor, I could talk about this for like hours and hours and hours, and we were here to bar. So I was trying to keep this kind of zippy. So every time I had a footnote or something I wanted to explain, well, actually, blah, 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 I put it somewhere else. And you can actually click on this link and go to Twitter. You don't have to like be signed up for Twitter, and you'll see all of the references, links to really cool stuff, and all the stuff that I'm going to kind of gloss over here to keep this moving. All right. All of that is on the handout on your desks as well. Your desks. Good luck, class. Have your table. Last little bit of housekeeping. The story of student success at UW-Tacoma is a collaborative story. So I'm going to be telling you about lots of things that happen at UW-Tacoma and in the Tacoma community, some of which I am directly responsible for, but a lot of which I'm not. So I wanted to start just acknowledging that this is group work, this is collaborative work. All of these various units, plus many, many more, are very engaged in a lot of this work. Particularly want to call out my very good partner, Amanda Figueroa. She and I work very closely on a lot of this work. So whenever I say I, just assume it's like a we, like me and Amanda, and all of these other folks, some of whom are represented here. All right, with all of those caveats, let's get started. So we're here to talk about the story of college student success. And I'm hoping to convince you of a couple of things by the end of this hopefully fairly short presentation. One is that this matters, that college student success is important, not just to college students and not just to colleges, but to our community, to our country, and to our future. And that there's really concrete things that we can all do to help students be successful, to support success in college and beyond. What am I talking about when I'm talking about college? I will tell you what I am not talking about is the things that you see in this image. We're not talking about sort of the media portrayal of college. In this case, probably 30-year-old actors, going to keggers and having food fights and that kind of thing. That is one experience of college. It's a real experience of college, but that is not the experience of the vast, vast majority of college students in the United States. So this is not what we're talking about. That is not the right slide. Let's try that again. You know how many times I tested this? Okay, we are going to adjust. What do you folks think is the average age of college student in the United States? So we're going to go from 20 to 28 in increments of 2. How many think it's 20 average age? Couple of people, 22, couple, 24, few more, 26, you as well, 28. All right, the answer is 26. The average college student in the United States is 26 years old. Something like 65% of Americans think that the average, what do you think most Americans think the average college age is? 20, right? The average 18 to 22 is 20. right? Well, no, the average college student is 26 years old. Only half of college students attend full time. That means the other half are not attending college full time. 40% of college students are attending four-year schools. So two-year schools, other models of higher ed, and 87% of college students do not live on a college campus. So this idea of dorm life, while a very important, pathway for some, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about sort of the reality of being a college student in 2023. Let's bring this closer to home. UW-Tacoma. More than half of UW-Tacoma students are the first in their family to go to college or to get a college degree. That often means that those students are the shining superstars academically in their family. More than half of our students transferred from another school, so didn't go directly from high school to UW-Tacoma, although that number is going down. Vast majority of our students are from Washington, will graduate and stay in Washington. And given where we're located, we have a very large military affiliated population there too. The average college is getting more diverse over time. So here are some race and ethnicity data in 2011 and 2020. And so colleges in general are getting more diverse over time, as is the whole country. The typical UW-Tacoma student, UW-Tacoma has always been a fairly diverse campus, continues to be. One thing that's really cool about the population of students at UW-Tacoma is there's no one racial or ethnic group that dominates. So for those, I know there's a lot of people in the room who are colleges. It's diverse in the classic sense of the word, or technical sense of the word. Okay, so given what we just learned about who most college students are at UW-T and across the country, let's talk a little bit about why it matters. So I want to start out by saying that technical community colleges and other forms of credentials are really helpful, wonderful pathways for folks, right? What we're talking about here is graduating from four-year college. So the benefits of graduating from a four-year college have been studied by a range of different places. One thing that's often cited is higher wages. So it's something like $30,000 more a year for a college grad versus someone who did not go to college. Over a person's lifetime, I'm sure y'all have read these numbers before. They're kind of all over the map. The most conservative is about $675,000 more of earnings in your lifetime. Likewise, folks who graduate from college have about 3.5 times lower poverty rates. These studies, the community benefits and the social and health benefits studies are really, really striking. So the life expectancy of a college graduate is 7 years higher than someone who didn't go to school. Someone who went to college is 5 times less likely to be in jail or prison. Happiness, there's actually some studies that show the happiness indicators are higher for college graduates. And then not thinking about this from the individualistic point of view, but thinking about this from a community point of view. Communities with more college graduates are more resilient. They have more economic activity, and even things like volunteerism, philanthropy, and political engagement are all higher in communities with more college graduates. So it's important. Now, given that, the courses are really going to plague me. Given that college graduation, I stressed, it's going to college, but it's graduating from college, where most of those benefits come from. What should be on the screen, and it was every time I practiced this, is what do you think is the average graduation rate in the United States, college graduation rate? And what do I mean by college graduation rate? It means a student goes to a college and graduates from that college within 6 years. So we're going to go from 60% to 90%. Who thinks it's 60% in the US? Quite a few. 70? Quite a few. 80? Handful? 90? Nobody. So this is a very educated group right here. 61% in the US, is the college graduation rate. When I put this slide together is when I realized I needed to have that separate references because there's a bunch of people in this room who've been cornered by me discussing the technicalities of these numbers, and we're not going to get into that. I promise. I'm going to keep it really high level and just say the way we measure college graduation rates kind of doesn't make any sense. It's like going to a college and staying at that college and graduating from that college, but y'all have already learned, didn't know already. That's not what college students are doing. They're not graduating from high school, going to a college, and then graduating from that college, right? So if you look at just the students who are what we call first year at UW-Tacoma, so the apples to apples comparison, our graduation rate is about 56%. But if you actually look at all UW-Tacoma students, regardless of where they're coming from, our overall graduation rate is 72%. Fundamentally, who cares? Right? Like these numbers take too much explanation. So let's talk about humans, right? Let's actually talk about human beings rather than worrying about this in terms of percentages and rates. In the United States, there are 40 million people who started college but didn't finish. No college or some college, no degree. 40 million in the US, 700,000 in Washington. This number from UW-Tacoma is a bit of an overestimate. I calculated this one myself. So think of that as the upper limit. But since Peter and I got here in 2006, we have about 3,000 students who started at UW-Tacoma and did not graduate from UW-Tacoma. They might have graduated somewhere else. That's why I think the number is a little high. But it gives you an order of magnitude of people, right? These are people who started college and left for some reason. That's what we're going to talk about. Why did they leave? What are some of the consequences of leaving? What are some of the things that you can do to help support those folks? So, given everything I told you, if we merge that all together and think about college graduation and think about who it is who's going to college, what those different pathways through college are, what we know about graduation rates, and what we know about the people who are some college, no degree out there in our community. 1 in 5 people in the state of Washington between the age of 17 and 54 started college and didn't finish it. 1 in 5. So there's a number, think of how many people are in this bar. There are a lot of people probably in this room who started college and didn't finish. Unemployment rates for folks who start college but don't finish are just about the same as those who never went to college. 70% of some college no degree folks are below a living wage. And then we don't have a number for Washington, but if you think about it, if your employment rate is about the same as if you didn't go to college, but you did go to college, chances are you also have debt from the time you were in college and didn't get that degree. So I would argue this is an equity imperative in our state to think about college graduation, some degree, some college, no degree, and what some of the consequences of that might be. Luckily, we live in an amazing community. Tacoma is known nationally for working together as a community. I want to credit Leanne, it's still in my head, when we talked about the ducks and the horses that we seem to be stuck on for the rest of the talk. She said, well, given I know you're going to be talking about community, so it's got to be the small horses banding together. And so I told her she won, but there was no answer to that question, but that's the answer to the question. Little duck-sized horses banding together to defeat the giant duck. All of that to say, Graduate Tacoma is a group in Tacoma that started in 2010, really focused on the K-12 space. In 2010, there was this famous article that came out, it was like, it covered Newsweek or something, that called Tacoma Public Schools a dropout factory. And who did Tacoma not like that? So Graduate Tacoma formed to bring together partners from all across our community to tackle this, right? So in 2010, our high school graduation rate was 58%. In 2019, it was over 90%. That's higher than Seattle, higher than the national average. And equity gaps were reduced. So equity gaps for homeless students, students of color, and students from lower incomes. So Then they realized around the end of the 20-aughts, or whatever we call them, well, wait a minute. So now we have a much better high school graduation rate. What's happening to Tacoma Public Schools students after they graduate? In 2019, 49% of Tacoma Public Schools graduates went on to college. And of them, only 53% graduated. So like half of Tacoma Public Schools graduates aren't going to college, and the ones that do, half are graduates. So the idea was, you know what? We got to focus on this. This is kind of the next challenge for Tacoma. From 2020 to 2030, we're going to be really focused on post-graduation success of our people, our children, and our siblings and our friends. So Graduate Tacoma now has a new 2030 goal that's 70%. 70% of students are going to have a college degree or some other sort of credential, because again, those other pathways are also really valuable, or 70% earning good earning wage jobs. So we have been a part, UW Tacoma's been part of Graduate Tacoma for some time. We got together and Graduate Tacoma invited us into a group that's called Tacoma Completes. So TCC, UW Tacoma, some community partners got together and were like, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to work as a community to think about these students? Well, the first thing you got to ask, why do students leave college in the first place? What is driving that? Now, there is no one answer to this question. There's no one reason why students leave. There's no one thing we can do to help them stay. And for an individual student, the why could be lots of different things. It's unlikely to be one thing, right? So Tacoma Completes got a nice pot of money from the Gates Foundation, and working with Degrees of Change, who were the ones who were like the face of the study. We interviewed 56 students who left either UW Tacoma or TCC or both, and just had a conversation like, what happened? Why did you go? What would it take for you to come back? What happened? So on the little handout, there is a link to what's called the Student Voices Report. We're going to be talking about the Student Voices Report for the rest of this talk, hopefully not much longer. There were basically 7 themes that came out from students when they talked about their experience being in and leaving college. 4 of them fall into what I'm calling basic needs. And then one of them is this idea of sense of belonging and sense of purpose. So we're going to talk about those 3 things in that order. When I'm talking about basic needs, these were some of the themes that we heard from students. Financial issues, family care and life events, mental health, which if you're paying attention and reading the newspaper, you know has gotten way, way worse across the country, especially for youth, and physical health. So these 4 items, I'm calling them basic needs because you can kind of think of them as sort of the lower part of the hierarchy of what folks need to thrive. Again, going back to this theme that this is about sort of a human-centered approach and thinking about what people need and what students need as being pretty closely related, right? So the idea around basic needs in college for college students has sort of reached, I don't want to say crisis proportions, but given some of the sort of cultural and economic issues in the country at large, those hit college students often fairly hard, basically because of the age that they are, because of the process of going to college can be very expensive and very difficult. So the Real College Survey is done by the Hope Center at Temple University. They look at a whole range of basic needs for students, and the numbers are really striking. 3 in 5 college students have experienced some basic need insecurity. 30 to 40% have experienced food insecurity, and something like 50% have had some level of housing insecurity. The equity gap in terms of these basic needs is actually quite large. And the number over here, I don't have a pointer, but the number in the corner, 52% did not apply for supports, right? So many colleges have supports for things like housing, food, mental health, but more than half of students didn't use them because it says here because they didn't know how. There's a range of reasons we talk to students why students don't use some of the supports that we have. So here at UW-Tacoma, we have a range of different offices that focus on some of these needs for our students, many of which are in the student affairs division. I see Sean is here from student affairs. So we have a food pantry, we have a social worker, a case manager who helps support students and get them into emergency housing and a range of different things. Emergency aid, a housing program with Tacoma Housing Authority, counseling services, financial wellness programming, that kind of thing. I want to call out the work of Christine Stevens from our School of Nursing. She has worked quite a bit with the Hope Center, but also with a tri-campus group that has interviewed UW-Tacoma students around issues of food and housing insecurity. So those numbers I showed you before, those are national, right? But now you see the theme. I keep trying to go back to the local. Something on the order of 25% of UW-Tacoma students self-reported skipping or cutting the size of their meals. And on the order of 10 to 15% didn't eat something. So focusing on basic needs is a critical part of student success. This might be a good opportunity to mention that we have a food pantry on campus. Here is a link. The link is also on your handout. I'm a good college professor, where you can support the food co-op, the food pantry, or alternatively, if you're a student, you can visit the food pantry. So here is more information about the food pantry. Next, we said we talk about belonging. So when we talk about belonging, I invite you again to think about this. Students are people, right? And you think about the needs of people. Think about when you have felt in your life like you really belong somewhere. And how did you show up in those spaces? Did you do your best work in those spaces? Did you feel the most comfortable in those spaces, right? It's the same for college students, but as we mentioned, college students are often coming from very different backgrounds. They're often coming from families that are not used to college going culture. And so feeling like you are part of a community, there's a ton of research that shows how important it is to have that sense of belonging. To make it a little more personal to UW-Tacoma students, in our Student Voices study, we heard a lot of quotes around this. One person said, I felt a little disconnected from what I was used to coming out of high school. Coming out of high school and not having that strong sense of community, I felt a little lonely. I didn't really have any friends that I could talk to, and my professors, I just felt kind of disconnected. Another student said, I go to class, I go home, I live my day, and I don't really interact with a lot of people on campus. Those are the kinds of things that we heard around sense of belonging. A few things that we do at UW-Tacoma to focus on sense of belonging, and I was hesitant to make a list because I feel like we all are working on trying to encourage a sense of belonging at UW-Tacoma. So I know there's faculty in the room. That's part of what we try and do in class. But some very specific things we have at UW-T, the Center for Equity Inclusion, First Generation Initiatives, peer advisors, PAC advisors, clubs, and affinity groups, orientation and welcome days. I particularly want to call out this very cool campaign that comes out of the Office of First Generation Initiatives, which right now is run by DJ Crisostomo. Many of you are from UW-Tacoma, but if you aren't, if you look around on campus, there are these cool posters that really celebrate our first gen staff, students, leaders, faculty, who are the first in their family to go to college. And so in our case, our chancellor was the first in her family to go to college. And so there's posters all over campus sort of celebrating being a first generation student. It really is a big deal. It is something to celebrate. It's something to be really, really proud of. And this campaign is starting to get some national attention. This is sort of unique. The rest of my time, I want to talk a bit about purpose. Because a lot of those offices working on belonging and basic needs It's not to say we've got that dialed in and we've got it figured out, but we do have quite a bit of programming around us, right? We have a pretty good idea that sense of belonging is super important to students being successful. This in the Student Voices report is what really struck us. It's the #1 theme in that report of why students left college, because they weren't entirely sure why they were in college in the first place. So these are 2 quotes from the report. This student said, I really think that I didn't have much motivation being there because I didn't see what I was actually gaining from being in school. I was just kind of doing what everybody had always told me to do, that I was supposed to be in school. And they were like, you know, I've run into some challenges. I've run into some barriers. What am I doing? You know, there's other things I could be doing with my time and my money. Another student said, I didn't want to waste any more time and money not knowing what career I wanted to go into. So purpose, this idea of purpose and the importance of the why is something that, especially post-COVID, we're really starting to pay more attention to. When we talk about purpose, we're talking about an active commitment to goals that are meaningful to the self and of consequence to the world beyond the self. So this is career, but this is bigger than career, right? This is sort of like the big picture. Why am I here? Why am I in college? What am I hoping to get out of this? It is not the same thing as passion. It is not something you were born with. You don't like wait to discover your true purpose. It's something you develop and that people can help you to develop with you. It endures over time. It grows with effort and expertise. And this paper by Colby 2020 has some really great data about the relationship between purpose and health and wellness. So purpose is really not just around college students, right? So if you think about this idea of like, what is my purpose? What is my why? Once you start looking around, it's so fundamental. It's such a fundamental part of being human that you'll see it in places like in religion or in very popular books. This book, Start With Why, is on all sorts of bookshelves. Many of you probably have this book on your bookshelf. And it is not a uniquely American thing either. Having some interest in trying to figure out your why it's almost silly to talk about because it's so fundamental to who people are, right? So starting from there and thinking about that from a student's point of view. So here are some examples of what this looks like for a college student. You know, college students who have been so successful that they have been highlighted and given awards for their amazingness here at UW-Tacoma. So we have Deshawn, who was one of those We Are First Generation Scholars that I already talked about, and Naya, who is just was awarded one of the UW Husky 100. And both of them in their quotes, and if you look through those, you'll find almost every single one kind of relates to this idea of purpose and the intertwining with belonging. So if you'll excuse me, the text is very small, so I think I'm gonna do here. I realized my presence here was the answer to many of my ancestors' prayers. I would end the needless cycle of pain, heartache, and abuse. I would forever transform my family's trajectory. And then Naya talks about wanting to become a physician. So I will use the foundation that I built as an undergrad at UW, continue to build towards contributing to a future where everyone feels like their concerns are validated in an environment that focuses on community and inclusivity. So if you think about it, whenever we talk to students about purpose, there are some themes that emerge. Family comes out a lot, community, issues of equity come out very strongly from our students, and wanting to make the world a better place, right? But you can hear when you start looking at these with this lens of purpose belonging, how they're intertwined in these students' worldview of their time in college. All right. Hopefully I've convinced you that purpose and belonging are super important for student success. Hopefully I've convinced you that student success in college is important. Whether you are in college or not, it's important to all of us. Okay, now what? How do we support purpose and belonging in students? So we have in education this jargon called HIPS, high impact practices. You know what these things are, even if you've never heard that expression. They are things like study abroad, internships, one-on-one research with an advisor. Shout out to the Becker Lab over there. Independent study, things like this, things that provide more opportunities for engagement, right? There have been quite a few studies in the past couple of decades about HIPS and what happens the more HIPS students are able to experience in college. Deeper learning and engagement, the more HIPS students, high quality HIPS, that's that, higher retention and graduation rates, career preparedness increases, and this must make intuitive sense whether you're in higher ed or not. Like, if you do more internships, you're more likely to be more prepared for your career, right? Like that makes a lot of sense. And there have been quite a few studies that show that while all students benefit from HIPS, students from underrepresented groups are likely to have higher gains from experiencing those HIPS, especially first generation students and students of color. All right, what makes practice high impact then? So that list was very specific, and I'm thinking about my student affairs colleagues who are here, and student employment is high impact practice if it's done right. Internships, I don't know if anyone here has posted or done an internship that maybe was not transformative. So it's not just doing an internship, it's about qualities of these different activities. So I'm going to go through these very briefly. I want you to think about, as I'm showing these, okay, if you are an instructor, how do you bring these things into what you do? If you are a student, how do you try and get these things out of your experiences? If you are neither, but you have employees or interns or children, how do you incorporate these qualities to make whatever it is that you do more impactful for students, for whoever you're working with? Significant investment of time and effort, interaction with instructors and peers about things that matter, opportunities to reflect. This is a huge one. Having opportunities to reflect makes any activity that much more impactful. Frequent, timely, constructive feedback, a public demonstration of competence. That one's super jargony, but it's kind of my favorite. So I'm looking over at the Becker Lab again, and they know whenever they present their work at a conference, I get bouncy and super, super excited because talking about the cool stuff you do with your professor and with your classmates is not nearly as cool as talking to strangers or professionals about what you do. And that can be one of the most transformative things that a student can do, right? Opportunities to discover relevance of learning through real world applications, and then demonstrating the awareness, attitude, knowledge, and skills required to equitably engage and include people from different local and global cultures. So these 7 things are kind of the difference maker between something being a practice and something being a high impact practice. Okay, we're almost there. How to ensure equitable access to this? So hopefully now I have convinced going to college is important. I have convinced you purpose and belonging are important, and I've convinced you high impact practices are super important for engagement and for deep learning and for developing your sense of purpose. Think about a lot of those activities, internships, one-on-one research. What are some barriers to folks participating in some of those things, right? So I'm looking around there at some of the students that I have students who are going to come to my door, knock on my door and be like, oh, I want to work with you. What is it going to take to work with you? I want to do an internship. What's it going to take to do that, right? That's not everybody. That is a certain amount of social capital that you have to be able to do that kind of thing. Often you need to be able to drive. This is a big one. Often you need to not be working 40 or 50 hours on top of going to school in order to participate in that other thing, right? So equitable access to HIPS is kind of where it's at, right? How do we get there? Here's an example that you might not have already heard about. We got some money from the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, Amanda and I, and we put together a team of folks. In that picture, many of you know Yuta Heller, she was on the team. And they were really focused on what are some barriers to getting into internships. And so we really drilled down on first gen, low income students of color, getting internships through the SEED program in health careers. So we really put boundaries around this to try and make, didn't have a ton of money, but to try and make this kind of have high impact for one area. But we learned a lot of lessons that I think would be handy for all of us as we're thinking about those barriers to internships. They interviewed a bunch of students and Amanda did this magical design process. And some of the things that came out of that should be familiar from this talk already. Family. Family is super, super important. We're talking about anything related to education. Knowing how to do it. That was a big thing. Like knowing how to get from wanting an internship to being in an internship was a hard journey for a lot of people. And then the third thing was first generation students, I keep saying it, are the superstars of their family. So it's about celebration, pride, excitement, and being really open to celebrating all of the different milestones that folks are going. So I will leave you with what's coming up next. This year, a bunch of people who were in this room participated in this. We had a student success team that got together and talked about what we want to work on in the next year at UW-Tacoma. And so we've developed this student success strategy that has 5 different parts. One of them is high impact practices, but high impact practices should really be applied across all of these. So first year experience, graduate student experience, removing curricular barriers, and working on our communication and data systems and working with each other. So I want to leave you with an invitation. If you are part of the UW-Tacoma community and have not already volunteered to be a part of one of these teams, please, please, please. Next year is going to be awesome. We're going to be working hard on these 5 things. I hope to come back and give you more updates on all of the good work that these groups have all taken care of. So we're back to that. I have an ending question, which I'm going to actually, because it's the end of my talk, I will put the question up and you all can answer the question and we can see your answers as it goes. The ending question is, let's see. What can you do to support student success as a student, instructor, staff person, parent, employer, community member, however it is that you're coming to this? What is something that you can do to help support student success? While you're doing that, remember that you can switch on the Slido to the Q&A and ask me anything apparently. We'll see about that. You can ask me whatever you want in the Q&A and I'll decide whether or not I can actually answer it truthfully. But otherwise, I think we're going to go ahead and take a break. I really appreciate all of you for coming and for listening and for your patience. So thank you very much.